going on in the library. And thank you to our Fulton County Library Board. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. We are so pleased to have this, our second annual One Book, One Read program. We are most appreciative of our authors and our moderator. We thank the Atlanta Fulton Public Library Foundation for their continued support of library services and programs, among which is this signature event. We could not do it without them. Let's give them a hand. And as always, I want to be sure that we thank the Board of Trustees of the library, as well as the Board of Commissioners of Fulton County, and the leadership team led by County Manager Dick Anderson. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. J. Delano Ford, Chairperson of the Library Foundation, followed by Ms. Terry Gilliam, Branch Group Administrator, and the 2023 Chairperson of the One Book, One Read program.
Good evening. My name is Delano Ford, and we've been looking forward to this day for a very long time. We're excited to bring all of you together. I know that there have been folks all over the city reading this book and having conversations about it. I am incredibly honored to be able to lead alongside my other colleagues, so board members, raise your hands, as well as the staff who put this amazing event on. Taryn, thank you for everything you've done. The story of Belle DaCosta Green is one that is so fascinating. Her intelligence, her wit, her style, those things are embodied in so many people and so many stories right here in Atlanta. And as I read the story of the Personal Librarian, I thought about the lengths that so many women in our community, Black women in our community, go through for their families, for their communities, and for their careers. And I thought about how great it is that we as a city got a chance to read this particular book collectively. I am honored to be here. I want to sit down so the conversation can begin. Thank you all for being here as well. And please be sure to get your books signed and hang around after the conversation as well to get to know the authors who are both amazing dynamite. Thank y'all for being here.
Hello, everyone. I am Terry Gilliam, Branch Group Administrator for the Fulton County Public Library System, and welcome and thanks for coming out and sharing your evening with us today. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for the event. She is an American Anchor reporter, also a Union Pageant winner, former Miss Arkansas and first runner-up for Miss America. And she joined WAGA TV in 2016, where she serves as a station reporter and news anchor for Good Day Atlanta. So please join me in welcoming Miss Elise Eve.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. I know you guys are excited to get to the main event, so I'll keep this very, very short and sweet. I know exactly who you came to see today. So how about we welcome the authors of the Personal Librarian, Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. And though they need no introduction, we thought that the best way to know them a little bit better before we kick things off tonight would be to let them introduce each other.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun.
I can't wait. Who's going to go first?
So you go first.
Okay. So Victoria Christopher Murray is an instant New York Times bestseller of multiple books. And before she started writing historical fiction, she was an NAACP award winner of over 30 books. of contemporary fiction. But lest you think that's where she began, she was an uber successful business person, graduate of NYU Stern School of Business, an all-around fabulous person that I'm proud to call not only my friend and my partner, but my sister. Let's have a round of applause for Victoria Christopher Murray.
You can have a round of applause. That's I'm really impressed. We've never done that before.
Although I've heard your introduction at least 400 times.
Exactly. So Marie Benedict
See what she
is
does with
also an instant New York Times, USA Today bestseller of many books, including The Personal Librarian, The First Ladies, the only woman in the room, the other Einstein, so many that I love. And Marie got her start as an attorney. She likes to say that she's a recovering attorney. She did that for many years. She graduated from Boston College. Okay, I wanted to go to Boston University, so Boston College. But she never found her rhythm as an attorney. She just didn't want to be there. She knew this wasn't what she was supposed to do, and she had been a history major.
Wow, she's got this down.
And always just dreamed of doing something with that. So now she writes books, historical fiction books, of women who've been lost in the folds of history.
How about a round of applause for that? And now my sister Victoria Christopher Murray has joined me in all facets. She is writing her very own first solo historical fiction that will come out next year.
2025.
2025. The Book Muse of Harlem. So keep your eyes open for that.
Harlem Renaissance.
All right. So no, it's perfect. Can y'all get the sense that they are genuinely friends, sisters, have spent a lot of time together, really enjoy each other's company? I mean, I would say that that's pretty obvious.
People tell us that all the time. They don't know what they see, but yeah, she's one of my favorite people in the world.
I love that. I do. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. I want to talk a little bit first about this being a second career for both of you. I mean, we know that being an attorney was not going to be your life's ambition, right? How did you guys go from a one career into writing?
That's a good question.
Questions. No, never asked.
Yeah. So would you go today?
You go first.
I am where I'm supposed to be. I've always wanted to be a writer. Like I came out of my mother's womb knowing I was going to be a writer. And I wrote and I say that honestly, it's the only thing I ever wanted to do. I wrote my very first masterpiece when I was 7 years old. And a lot of people will chuckle and say, you can't write a masterpiece if you're 7. You can if you plagiarize. Because I wrote something called Betty and the Witch. It was about a little girl who wore a red uniform with a hood to school. She had 3 bears who were her brothers and 3 pigs were her sisters. And their best friends who lived next door were 7 little people. I didn't steal. They tell you to write what you know.
You did very
And I
well.
was 7 years old. But you know what's so interesting? Are there any teachers in the room? So I always like to thank you because my parents read this play, gave it to my teacher, she read it, and she had the entire 2nd grade perform it as a play.
Wow.
Amazing.
That changed my life. So from that point, I knew I was going to be a writer. I just didn't know how to get there. And so I'm only now doing what I was supposed to be doing. That other career was a placeholder.
Well, wow. In some ways, we are so similar. In some ways, we are very different. One way in which we're very different is that I never thought I was going to be a writer. I was just a kid who was a voracious reader. I was pester my librarians, pester my teachers for books. And I think I never aspired to be a writer because it just felt so daunting. There were all these amazing authors that I admired. But when I was in middle school, I had a wonderful aunt who was a professor. She was a poet, and she was a very rebellious nun. And she was the one who really gave me my most important books. And she gave me this book called The Mists of Avalon, which some of the ladies and I were talking about earlier tonight. It's a retelling of the Arthurian legend from the perspective of the women in Arthur's life. And that book just revolutionized my thinking. For the first time, I started to see women's stories, women's voices, marginalized corners of the past. And that book actually set me on the path towards finding these hidden stories. And it didn't manifest as being a writer at first. I went to college, became a history major. I thought maybe I'd become a professor or an archaeologist. And but I got detoured by that law degree. Oh, sorry for all of those you out there who aren't in recovery yet. I wish you the best. Finally, like Victoria, after I had, 11 years as a commercial litigator in New York City, I had an idea for a story out of the blue. And I kind of chipped away at it until I finally started walking down this path, kind of circling back to where I started, which was unearthing these stories of women that deserve to be told.
These hidden stories. And thank goodness she did. Yeah, thank goodness she did. Okay, so what was it about Belle? Because this was initially you that you're the one that, I'm not going to say discovered Belle, right? But
She discovered Belle.
But
In this
essentially,
partnership, in this
yes.
But she was known. I mean, that was
But in this partnership, you discovered Belle.
okay. Well, I think I mentioned I was this disgruntled lawyer, and so I would kind of like sneak out into the cultural institutions of New York City during my really, really long work days. So I would go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and, of course, the Morgan Library. Anyone here been there? Oh, quite a few of you. Is it not the most stunning place you've ever, no offense to this particular library, it's like a gold and crimson Renaissance masterpiece in there. Not that this isn't quite the same. But I used to love to go there and kind of envision a different path. And I happened to meet a docent who was finishing up with a tour. And even though there was absolutely no reference to this person at the Morgan at this time, which thankfully has changed, she mentioned that this incredible library, which really holds one of the world's most impressive collections of rare and priceless manuscripts and books, wasn't just started by J.P. Morgan, who financed it, but by Walter Costa Green. And I just thought, wow, how remarkable. A woman who ran this institution for 4 decades, became this powerhouse in the art world during a time when women didn't even have the right to vote. And so I kind of always had her in my mind as I made that transition to writing. And as the years progressed, we learned more about Belle's true identity. We learned that she was a Black woman passing as white. That was rumored but not confirmed during her lifetime and when I first was introduced to Belle. And it was then that Victoria and I got together. I knew that if I was going to turn to Belle's story or a character inspired by Belle, that she deserved to have her story told by Black women as well. As a writer of fiction, I can imagine a lot, and I do on a regular basis, but I can't imagine what it would be like to be a Black woman in our society. And I happened to be reading one of Victoria's books at the time, thankfully. If you haven't read it, stand your ground, just making a small plug, fantastic story. And
She reached out after reading that novel, and she reached out to our agents, and Marie sent me a 3-page synopsis of the story, but my agent told me nothing. She just said, read this for a possible project. That's it. What does that mean? And so the first thing I did was look up Marie Benedict. I didn't know her. And I saw that she wrote these wonderful stories of women who've been lost in history, but she was a historical fiction writer. And I had written 30 contemporary fiction novels, so what did that have to do with me? And then I saw a picture of her, and I wondered if she had ever seen a picture of me. Because I just wondered, what did she want to do? What if she writes historical fiction and she's not Black?
I'm not.
So I started reading, but then I couldn't get past the first 2 paragraphs on the first page because it was just about J.P. Morgan. And I was not interested in J.P. Morgan. So I kept trying to read it and putting it down. And my agent would call and say, have you read that proposal? And I was like, oh, I'm so busy. I'll get to it. So I picked it up and I couldn't get past the first page. And so,
It's my best writing, as you can see.
and so about 3 months passed, and she'll tell you this all
It
the
was more like 6.
No,
but
it
you
wasn't.
wanted to
It
say
was
3.
about 3 months. She writes fiction. Don't believe anything.
My husband says I lie for a living.
And so it was about 3 months, and I needed to look. Nobody is that busy. It's 3 pages. Read it. So I was with Rashonda, my friend Rashonda, and like we sat down together because we're thinking, what is my agent thinking? What is she thinking? So we read this first page. It was about J.P. Morgan. I couldn't take it. But the second page got a little bit more interesting.
Thankfully.
It was about Belle DeCosta Green, and I didn't know her, but at least she was more interesting than J.P. Morgan. I'm not kidding. The last page, last paragraph said, and no one knew that Belle DeCosta Green was Black until she passed away. I was like, are you kidding me? We could have saved 3 pages and
6 months.
we could have saved all that time if she had just sent that. You would have had that book 3 months earlier. It's her fault. I couldn't get to the phone. That's really what happened.
Except for 6 months.
It wasn't 6 months, but I couldn't get to the phone fast enough. And then we just called our agents connected us, and I'm not kidding. I said hello, she said hello, and we have been friends ever since.
And we actually haven't stopped talking since then, in case all of you are curious. We get the sense, and we love that. We do.
Okay, so one more before we really dive in. How do you write a book with someone? And this is something we had a chance to talk before today. And that was one of the questions that I asked, because I feel like it's so infrequently that we hear of authors collaborating on a book in the way that both of you did. So logistically, how do you even do that?
I've written with another author, Rashonda. I've written with another author, but this is what I know. I know that you have to have a writing soulmate. Because I know there are other people who've tried to write together, and now they don't even speak to each other. And it is really a tough thing to do. So I had found one person that I've written well with, and after one conversation with Marie, I knew I could write with her. Because you have to have a writing soulmate. You have to have someone who is going to trust you, someone you can say, no, we can't do this, someone you're going to say, oh, yes, we're going to do this. All kinds of things. No, I'm not interested in doing that. Remember when we were doing that part? I mean, you have to entrust that the person's never talking about you. We're trying to get to the best book. And we had that conversation. I don't even think Marie knew because she didn't know how to write. She had never collaborated before. But I knew.
I mean, really from that first conversation, I knew that we could collaborate, even though I didn't know how to collaborate. I'm going to be perfectly frank about that. I knew that Victoria and I had the same goals. You know, we both wanted to write the best book we could. We wanted to honor Belle DeCosta Green, right? That doesn't mean you always want to portray them as perfect. In fact, you need to portray them as a real person with flaws. Those flaws so often define us, so often make us rise to our greatness. And I could see that in her from the start. And then once we started to dive in, you asked, like, how do you do it? Having that trust between us right from the get-go allowed us to dive into all those nuances, you know, whether it was mapping out the story from beginning to end, mapping out each chapter, divvying up the chapters. We would each take a chapter and then give it to the other to edit. You know, so that whole process, especially for our first draft, was a learning experience for me, but it was really an exercise in trust. So by the time we got to the second draft, which is, you know, really the most momentous one, it's when you have all of your editorial comments, you're really diving in. We had this amazingly strong foundation to go into COVID with, right? And be together every day on Zoom, thankfully for Zoom, and then to deal with the racial unrest that was erupting in our country, which worked its way into the pages of our books, into our conversations. So it became, I'll let you say it, but we started out as.
Yeah, I always say we started out as writing partners. And then by the time we finished the first draft, we were kind of friends. Like I would have sent her a Christmas card if I sent that Christmas card. But by the time we did that draft during COVID, during racial unrest, we cried together. We laughed together, we cried a lot together, and we talked about everything you could think of. There's no way for a Black woman and a white woman to work together every day for about 6 months as race is exploding around them and not have both come out changed. There's no way. There's no way. And people always assume that Marie's the one that learned a lot about race.
I did.
I learned so much from her. Just because we could talk and ask and be honest about everything.
They said something in the elevator on the way down here, and I thought it was beautiful and it was profound.
I don't even know what it was.
The part about seeing the world through each other's eyes now, and I thought, that's incredible.
Yeah, and we really do because we talk about, excuse me for a minute. I'm a woman of a fantastic age, and so is Marie. And so occasionally we'll start being fantastic up here. And so when we're fantastic, just ignore us. We won't be. There's a couple of you in there. Fantastic people.
I'm going to venture to say that this is a fantastic library because they were distributing these fans, right, in the lobby. I've never had that happen before, and I was delighted.
So happy. It's really hot. But yeah, we do see each other. We do see the world now through each other's eyes. And we force each other to look at, sometimes we have to push each other to look at different things, different ways. And it's just the best friendship you can have. It really is.
It's interesting too, of all the topics, you guys aren't writing a book about going to the park, right? Going to the theme park or, just something like that. You're diving into something that has divided the country for hundreds of years, right? I mean, and then you look at something like passing, which is even more complicated almost when it comes to looking at the racial aspect of this. So let's talk about Belle. We know from reading the book that she was passing. She spent the first part of her life being raised Black, and then there's this switch that happens, and she becomes, for all intents and purposes, white. Passing is white. What do you think the complexities of that would have been for Belle, just her family, and do you think that we could look at her through the lens of today and say she's white, she's passing as white, or would we look at Belle and think that Belle's Black?
Ooh, good question. Well, first of all, let's start with the kind of the first part of that. I think you're right, we just dove right into all these charged, difficult, complex, nuanced topics. And for us, looking at the issue of Belle's passing, one of the most important things for both of us was to show the sacrifice attendant with that passing. Belle grew up with this amazing heritage. Her mother was this rich, free community of color, multi-generations that she had lived in for part of her childhood. And her father was this well-known advocate for equality, first Black man, graduate from Harvard, first Black professor at the University of South Carolina. So she came from this proud background, one that she should have been able to embrace, but one that she could not because of the segregation and Jim Crow that was emblematic of the country at that time, North or South, right? So we wanted to explore what it would be like for her to give up that heritage, to live as a white person, day in, day out. Not just the benefits that came with being J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, which is another reason why she did it. We want to talk about the mom. But we wanted to really explore all the nuanced things that she had to give up. Whether it was spending time with her extended family, right? They basically had to cut themselves off from their extended family. Whether it was giving up having a husband and a family of her own. And these are huge sacrifices. She walked a tightrope of fear of her discovering what that would mean for her extended family, because it was her identity upon which the entire family's role as white people hinged. And also the pain of that sacrifice that she had to make. But making that leap is one that initially, though, didn't choose herself.
Yeah, it came from her mother. It came from her mother. And you know, when we were studying Genevieve, if I could relate her to someone of today or today's times, not today, she was more like Coretta Scott King. She was standing by her man because Richard T. Greener was an activist. He was as famous as Frederick Douglass during the time. So he was an activist, and she was in the fight with him. She went down with him to South Carolina. You know, they were living in this wonderful time, the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and he was the first Black professor at the University of South Carolina. He was brought in as a librarian to put the library back together that had been destroyed during the Civil War. It was a wonderful, heady time. And then the Civil Rights Act was overturned. People did not want their Black sons sitting next to little Negro boys. And there was so much unrest that they had to leave. They were forced out through the hate. And I think she had never seen anything like that before. She had never seen, even though she knew about it, but she lived in this very protective environment and community. And she saw that hate and she did not want it for her children. And so when they went to New York, when they moved to New York, she didn't say, let's start passing. It was a very gradual thing. And she saw how easy it was and how much better it was. And they just gradually started passing until she put them down on the census as white. And, you know, one of the things I always say that I wanted people to see in this novel is that Genevieve was not passing because she wanted to be white. She was passing because she wanted to be equal. And there's a big difference. That was the only way she could be equal.
So I want to back it up just a little bit on the conversation with Genevieve. This is something that we talked about earlier. Who felt some kind of way, I guess, for the first, I mean, it was many chapters before we learned all of this about the backstory with Genevieve, what had happened at the University of South Carolina, all of that. Who else felt some kind of way about Genevieve? Because honestly, I did. It was kind of like I found myself passing judgment, which sounds terrible, but just kind of, you know, looking at it through the lens of today. The choice that she made for her family, but that was the point through the writing, is to you know, kind of have us take that journey along. Yeah, right.
And you know, while we both wanted the same thing for this book, but Marie and I were talking about this today. Marie really wanted to show the struggle and the sacrifice that people made with passing. That was her thing on every page, making sure that was there. I wanted to change Black people's minds. Because in our community, passing is like you're judging these people. You just don't want to be Black. You just think white is better. And that's not, I wanted people to see that people who were passing in that time are the same as us. And this is what I mean. She was just using whatever advantage she had. We do the same thing today, using whatever advantage we have. We send our kids to certain schools. We live in certain neighborhoods. We belong to certain organizations. We do use every advantage that we have to give our children a better life. And there are people judging us for that. And we were judging people who were just using their advantage. That's the biggest thing I wanted people to get out of this book.
So you look at Belle's life and you see her, you know, as a Black woman, but I feel like in the story you realize the significant contributions that she made as a woman, period, right? Like, you remember the parts of the story of her going into auctions and traveling all over the world and, being the only woman and, on top of that, being a Black woman. I mean, she really did break all kinds of barriers, right?
I mean, we absolutely loved and reveled in those scenes. Victoria and I have both been the only woman in the room. I mean, of course, also I wrote a book entitled The Only Woman in the Room, but that's beside the point about it anymore. I mean, when Victoria and I both entered the workforce prior to becoming authors, I was a lawyer and Victoria was in business. We were very, and this was, I won't say, it was many decades ago, let's just put it that way. We were often the only women in the room. And, that is a theme in all my books, especially in this book, that is so historic and modern, And we could draw on our personal experiences of what it would be like, what it would feel like to be Belle, being in an auction house, being the only woman, trying to make a market, and having that extra layer of also being Black and being the only Black person in the room. And what's fabulous about, there's so many fabulous things about Belle, but there were all these amazing profiles of her in newspapers and magazines at the time, celebrating not the Black part, but all the differences about her, which was so unique for that time. People loved to see this tiny, petite, powerful, bold woman outbid all the men. And I mean, that is so rare and unique for that time period, but there was something so special about Belle DeCosta Green that she was able to utilize all these techniques to get every treasure out from every other bidder and somehow be celebrated for it, right? So for us, celebrating those accomplishments and then watching her take this crazy disparate collection of J.P. Morgan, which had like Napoleon's watch, somebody's handkerchief, and some Gutenberg Bibles, and turn it into one of the most powerful, important collections, and then make it public. Take billions and billions of dollars worth of items and turn them over to the public. It was such a gift for us to celebrate that.
It's a public library today only because of Belle DeCosta Green.
Yeah, and I mean, just to get a sense of what that is worth, they have, as just a couple of the things that they have 3 Gutenberg Bibles. Together, those are worth several billion dollars.
With a B.
With a B, I did not say million. I mean, so it just gives you a sense, and that's just a couple of the objects. I mean, and she is the one who made that all happen. She left that for us.
All right, so let's talk about what Belle would experience. The parts of the book that I'm thinking about right now with, run-ins with Anne Morgan and Elsie Wolfe, alluding to the fact that they know about her background. So what do we know about that? Like, what did she really experience at the time? And were there truly, these stories that were floating around about Belle's heritage?
Yeah, I think there were stories. So remember, we're looking at this book with 100-year-old eyes. So that's the first thing. So I don't think there were a lot of people saying, she Black. I think they were saying, what is she? More, what is she? Because remember, we weren't talking about biracial and mixed race and, there was the term mulatto, but it was mostly a Southern thing. It wasn't in New York. So yes, but there were articles that said her dusky complexion, or I found some article after digging for like 5 hours, I found an article that said something about her tropical roots. Yeah. And I was like, what are tropical roots? I was like, is that her hair? What are you talking about? Like her roots? What are you?
Go in with that.
We ran with it.
Yeah.
We ran with it. I found that we cracked up for like 5 hours laughing about tropical roots. We're like, that's cold. What do you mean?
We know.
But I still don't think they were saying she's Black. I think there may have been, but I think they were like, what is she?
And, her mother had taken advantage of the fact that there was this huge influx of Mediterranean immigrants at this time by adding DeCosta to the name, alluding to a Portuguese heritage, right? The smoke and mirrors continued, right? And so those rumors could go on, but without the verification that Richard T. Greener was her father, she could just coast on the rumors. And if JP Morgan said you were white, it didn't matter what you looked like, you were white.
Because if he said I was white, we would be white. You know?
Okay, let's dig into Belle's relationships. We're gonna start with the relationship with Bernard. He had his own secrets, right? Like that was its own thing, and this passionate relationship with them. Let's talk about any truth to all of that, and just kind of, I mean, could they have ever worked? Could it have ever?
So any truth, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Any truth that his wife knew, yes. Any truth that his wife would write to Belle and said, please come get my husband because he loves you, yes. I mean, that was crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was totally crazy. Everything, one of the things that I love about writing historical fiction, and I've learned so much from Marie, is that especially in the Personal Librarian and in the First Ladies, every scene is based on some truth. It's based on something that we know happened, that we built from it. Every single scene except for one. There was only one scene that we totally made up.
We did it for ourselves,
Yeah,
let's be honest.
Yeah, it was with Bernard. So remember near the end of the book where she's in London and Bernard doesn't show up again. And then she's like, I've had it, and she gets into a Rolls Royce. It has to be a Rolls Royce. And she leaves him standing on the corner with exhaust in his face. We totally made that up. Because we couldn't stand it anymore. We were so sick of him. And so Lynn just said, he's gotta go. And we couldn't kill him like we would do in my kind of fiction.
Oh, I go so far.
Yeah, because we had to stick to this history, and she didn't kill him, but we would have. And so, but we also think Belle would love that scene because we did for her what she never did for herself. They were together, through until the day she died.
Yeah, I mean, we think that the relationship really transformed it from less of a romantic one to more of just friendship over the years.
She should have never spoken to him.
Oh, he was horrible to her. But she wrote to him almost every day, and he to her, in these journal-like letters, and she would post them once a week. So they're kind of like a diary that we still have. So in that respect, we're kind of happy that they stayed together. But would they have worked? No, definitely not. He was too much of a philanderer. His wife was around, and Belle could never, ever take that leap of getting married and having children, And in a way, that was what was attractive about each other on some level, is that there never would be that pressure, right? You asked another question, though, about his own secrets, and you alluded to the secrets of Anne Morgan and Elsie DeWolf. And something that was really important for us to explore and our parallels to throughout the book were all the secret identities that people were keeping, right? I mean, yes, Belle probably had the biggest, most dangerous secret identity, right? She's a Black woman. But Bernard was Jewish, and that was a very, very rarefied world he was operating in, right? He had converted. His identity was, kind of on the down low a little bit. And Morgan, well, now, did we know for sure that she and Belle confronted each other with their secrets? We don't. But it's fairly well known that Anne Morgan was a gay woman, and she was in Boston marriages. How many out there heard this term for the first time? Boston marriage, yes. That's a real thing. So, we wanted to explore the fact that there were so many people leading these double lives, hiding their identities in their efforts to conform to this very narrow society. And of course, then draw those parallels to today. It's still very much a theme in modern times as well, even though we seem to be more open in some ways.
Okay, so Bernard, and then we have the relationship with JP Morgan, which is a little less, I feel like, black and white, a little more gray. Do you feel like it was inevitable that with just seeing who the two of them were, how closely they worked, do you think it was inevitable that there was going to be something that happened between Belle and JP Morgan?
Oh, did we talk about this?
We talked about this forever. This is a fun discussion. What do we think? Most of the dialogue in the book has to be made up. We don't know what they said or anything like that. But there are two words in there that really were the truth. Belle was interviewed one time, and a journalist asked her, "Did you and JP, ever have an affair?" And she said, "We tried." So Marie and I spent hours on the phone.
What does that
Trying
mean?
to figure out what does "we try" mean. And so then we had to come to the thing that, okay, maybe they tried, but we don't think they went very far. Because Belle was smarter than that. Because JP Morgan was a bad breaker-upper. She had been around him enough to watch him break up with women, and that would have been good for her. She couldn't get in a relationship with him and it not work out. Where was it going to go? It was never going to go anywhere. And she probably knew that it would not be a smart thing for them to do. So that's why we handled the "we tried." But we talked about that for an hour. We had fun going back and forth. And
We definitely thought, as we, hint at in the book, that these two could not have been together and not had some sort of attraction, right? She was this beautiful woman. He was a known philanderer. He would have been, even though he was unusual looking, he was supposedly very charismatic. They're both fiercely intelligent. They both loved art, loved books. There would have been so much that brought them together as people, and yet we don't think that would have gone there. Not really. That's too much of a risk. And not just her own career at stake, but if she tumbled down, she brought a lot of people with her. Her whole family really depended on her for their status in life. They had, most of them had jobs and supported themselves in some extent, but the life to which they had grown accustomed was one that felt provided for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. At times it felt a little unfair, honestly, the amount of pressure that was on Belle. You look at everybody's lifestyle, depending on her, right? The way that they move up to bigger, nicer apartments and, they're all living together. It felt a little bit unfair to have that amount of pressure on Belle's shoulders.
they didn't do it on purpose. They didn't put that pressure on her because they did all work. But I always say it would be like if the three of us are sisters, and Marie and I are working out here as these authors, and you're Oprah.
Please take us to Hawaii.
No matter what we do, it's not going to equal Oprah. You know what I mean? And I think it was really like that. I'm not even kidding. It was, they weren't doing it on purpose. What could they do to match Oprah?
They weren't going to turn down the summer cottages at the beach. More risky was the identity discovery. Because they were married white people, they all worked in white positions that were typically held by white people. But yeah, it wasn't planned, but yeah, she was over it. Yeah.
Well, that's why I kind of love the part too when Belle had the apartments off together and then moved into her own.
She moved into her own, and you could only open it, it could only be unlocked from her side. I love that.
Well, a young unmarried woman at that time couldn't live alone. So it gave her cover, but still allowed her to have her own kind of existence. She could entertain Bernard or whoever she wanted over there. And she was in control. They were beholden to her.
So I'm trying to keep track of the time because I know that a lot of folks in the audience have questions, and so we want to be able to respect that. So I'm going to ask you one more thing about just passing, and it's something that we did talk about before. How Belle had to pass for the white people because the white people knew that there was something going on there. But let's dive a little bit deeper into that with just I guess take it from there. How about that? Just how deep of an issue that is, how whites and blacks would have seen that so differently.
And we do see it differently because in the Black community, Everybody has known about passing. Everybody's known somebody who's passing. Black people have very strong opinions about passing. And you will meet white people today who's like, wow, I didn't even know about passing. I didn't. So it's two totally opposite views because black people, there's not a black person that does every black person. And if you're my age or older, you know someone who passed. So it's a very dicey subject, among us. And it was interesting because we ran into some situations. Somebody asked us earlier about the woman on the cover of the book.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it was a really great question that nobody's ever asked us because it was a black person who asked us, and you asked us, and she said, the woman on the cover of the book could not pass. What is she doing on the cover of the book? And I said, yes, she could pass. Because this was an interesting thing that happened in the process. As we were choosing models for the cover of the book, they sent it to the two of us, and we're going through it together, and I'm like, she black, she black, she black, she black. On every single one, she black, she black. And then finally, I'm sitting at home saying, we're never going to find a model. And then I called up Marie and my editor and everybody on the team. I'm the only black person. And I called up everybody on the team and said, I'm going to take myself out of the decision of the cover model because I'm black. And passing is not for black people. You don't pass so that things go well for you with black people. You pass so things will go well with you for white people. People don't pass for black people. People pass for white people. So I took myself out of choosing the model. And I think at first, what was your reaction?
Well, I understood why, absolutely, because we had talked about each and every one of those models. And it's interesting because, just so you guys know, that process is unusual. Usually you don't have a model, usually they're digitized. We were very, very heavily involved in what this cover was going to look like. And, I would say the team was very deferential in terms of our choices.
Yeah. They were a little surprised, I think, when I said that to them.
Yeah.
Because I think they said, wow, she's like really being honest. But we had been honest through the whole book.
There was nothing not honest about it.
Yeah, so we had been honest through the whole book. I wasn't going to stop at the cover. I did not need to be making the decision about that cover.
So smart though. I mean, that's so smart.
Well, I kind of got it when it was like, she black, she black. When I couldn't find one person who would pass to me, then I said, wait a minute, they're not passing to me.
Right.
Passing is not for black people. So when you watch those movies and you say, I don't even know how they had her cast because she should have been in passing, because I know all y'all said that about Mel Larson's book. Every single one of y'all said that. It wasn't for you. Not the movie. The movie was for you, but the casting was not for you. Every one of us has a very, 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 very dark grandfather, very, 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 very fair grandmother, and then they all had kids, and they all look like the rainbow, so we know. Black people know black people. So don't try to, don't tell them that they're doing the wrong thing. The cover model was perfect.
Absolutely perfect. And I think this mic, you don't hear me on this mic? Okay, can you hear me on this one?
Oh, can you hear me? You want to borrow mine? Okay, you want to share?
Okay, really quickly, yeah.
You can share.
Okay.
So along those lines, who looked up a picture of the real Belle? When you saw her picture, and I'm just curious, did you think to yourself, she was black? Like, did you, that's what I did. That's the same thing. I was like, she could never pass, but I hadn't thought about it in the way that both of you.
Who was assessing her, right? So when you ask yourself, like, who does she have to pass for? As Victoria said, it's not for her family, right? It's not for the black people in her community. It's for J.P. Morgan and the people at the parties. And for Belle, it was not only about her the shade of her skin. It was about the way in which she presented herself, introduced herself, carried herself, and she carefully cultivated an image that would defy anyone's presumption that she was a Black person, right? Because a Black woman wouldn't stand up in a room and bid out 50 white men in an auction. A Black woman wouldn't, parade into a party with a bright crimson scarf, right? So therefore, she wasn't a Black person, no matter what she looked like.
Yeah, and when we have a favorite story. We went to the Morgan Library together, and Marie had been there dozens and dozens of times, and it was my first time there. And as we're walking through the library and into J.P. Morgan's office, there's this great portrait right behind, a beautiful portrait. And I was stunned, so stunned that I stopped moving. And so Marie's walking on, and then she comes back to make sure I'm okay. And I said, "What's the Black man doing there?"
And I said, "What Black man?"
Same portrait. I looked at it and said, "What's the Black man doing there?"
I didn't see a Black man, I saw a white man. Until we dug deeper. And Portrait of a Moor.
You'll have to Google it, because I did, and immediately, just like you, I was like, this man's Black, so it's so interesting.
But I saw that same picture, and because I knew, or thought I knew, I was an establishment during an era of segregation, built by a white man for his white compatriots, I assumed he would have the portrait of a white man on the wall, especially behind his desk. But when you dig deeper, it's Bella Costa Green who bought that portrait. And after he died. And it was her that hung it behind his desk. And boy, does he look like a young Richard T. Greener.
He looks like her father. And we're not the only people. When we were a Good Morning America book club pick, and we did the interview there.
I love how she just wrote, come on!
Oh, yeah, we were a Good Morning America book club.
We do love that. We do like to say it.
But the only reason I say that is the crew was there, because we did it in the library. And this young guy walks by and he looks at the picture and says, he's Black. He walks by and he said, "Hey, what's Lionel Richie doing?" And I looked at Maria and I said, "I told you."
But that painting, our experiences with it, it's like a perfect symbol for the book, right? You see what you expect to see. You see what you're told it is. You see it through your lens, or the lens of your time, or the lens of the receiver. And that's something that we learn not only through the course of this book, but then we have learned to share that lens with each other and look through the world through each other's eyes as well.
A gift of a book for us, and a gift to each other.
It is a gift. Because now it's rolled over to other parts of our lives. So no matter what's going on, she's like the first person that I tell about anything. Like, she's the first person I told I was going to see Beyonce.
And I was so upset that I was not going.
And she was like, "I can't believe I don't know."
But I was happy for you and jealous.
Okay, one thing I'm so glad I just remembered. What about moving forward? Will we see Belle in this story of the personal librarian on the screen, perhaps?
We hope so. We hope so. Victoria can speak a little bit more to what the process looks like, because 5 of her books have turned into Lifetime movies. Hello. But we are fortunate, as Victoria mentioned, we were a Good Morning America book club pick, and we were interviewed in the Morgan Library by Deborah Roberts, who we always joke actually loves Bella Costa Green, Personal Librarian, more than we do. She just fell in love with the book. Introduced it to her husband, Al Roker. You may be familiar with him. And maybe, I don't know. And the 2 of them decided that they wanted to option it. Now, Victoria can tell you what that process was.
Yeah, it takes a long time. That's all I'll say. It takes a long time, but they were very interested. The 2 of them have been such great supporters of ours. But they want to option it not only for a movie, but for a miniseries. Like, he really Al wants to do a miniseries and then do a documentary. He has big dreams for it, so we're excited.
Congratulations on that. That's a huge deal. That's amazing. It truly is. Okay, so how do we want to do this? I know that you guys have questions, Taryn. How do we want to do this?
So and I'm gonna do something that's gonna shock somebody. Hi, Juanita. So this woman is probably the first fan I had over 25 years ago. I met her online through like AOL Black Voices. That's how long ago it was. Like, oh, and so we've been in touch all these years. She's my Wordle partner. We play Wordle together every day. And I didn't know you were coming. So great to see you. And I snuck and gave her a copy of the Personal Librarian. I didn't tell you early on because she never read a book like this. And I was concerned with my fan base. I have a nice fan base, and I figured if Juanita could like this book, or she'll tell me honestly, and then I was going to be okay. And she loved it. Good to see you. And we love questions. Hi, Berta.
Hi, Victoria. My birthday twin.
Yes.
I've my third time seeing. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, we share the same birthday, Victoria.
Yes.
And I've been to see her twice. I've gone to the Bahamas twice to see her. And I'm so delighted to be here. They didn't have our name on the list outside. And I said, I'm gonna have to get her a coffee. So it's a better thing. But the Don is gone outside. Put the money in the parking, and she give me back there. But I am so in awe to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, she's been to the Bahamas to see me twice. That's down every year.
Hello.
Hi.
Thoroughly enjoyed the book. Thoroughly enjoyed it and this conversation. My question is, well, first of all, I was wondering until you just clarified that the husbands of her siblings were white, because I did not see that in the book. I was like, how is this going to work if they are white? Because I thought that was her safe place. And that's where she could be herself. So I was wondering how was she able to, did they know?
When you're passing, you have to pass all the time.
That's what I thought. That's
Yeah,
why I
you
did.
can't be half, it's like half pregnant. You can't. I'm not even trying to be funny. But we get that question, and the first time we got that question, we were so surprised. But we didn't do a good job of making sure everybody knew that the husbands were white. Well, I was like, what did we do wrong? I'm gonna tell you. People said to me, they thought they were black because they didn't have jobs.
Okay.
I told Marie that my feelings were so hurt.
I think there'd be some conversation. When she went home, I thought that was where she let herself go and be herself.
Yeah. So when you're passing the way they weren't passing for convenience, they were passing. You didn't leave your role. Because if you were acting when you go outside, because she was acting the whole time, then when you're home, if you drop the mask too much, you could slip when you're outside. Right. Genevieve was never going to let them be black behind closed doors and white in the world. That wasn't going to work. Not the way they were passing. So her safe place was in bed at night with her head on her pillow.
Another comment is that I was thinking about if she had not been so successful, wouldn't their life have been very good with where they were living, how they were living before? I mean, the father was successful. I mean, I know it was after Reconstruction, but there were plenty of, at that time, colored people or Negroes that were doing well and feeding themselves and then leaving something to their people versus this was always going to be a secret.
Until we found
out if they hadn't. We would have thought It would never have been part of our community.
Yeah, do you mean the discovery of her?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
But if she had stayed, if the family had stayed as,
Oh, I see,
you know,
yeah.
versus the other, I mean, she was living a good life.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the things that Victoria and I felt pretty strongly about, in thinking about Genevieve, because we talked a lot about Genevieve, we knew that the decision would be polarizing, the decision would be one that people had a lot of feelings about, right? Was, in addition to her being really an advocate in her own way, right, and supporting the fight for equality, going with Richard T. Greener to South Carolina, really seeing it firsthand, we also felt like she might have been much clearer about what the future held for Black people than her husband. Her husband had been a staunch advocate of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which, if it hadn't been overturned by the Supreme Court in the late 1800s, would have provided equality for everybody, right? It would be a different world, different America if that hadn't been overturned. When they went down to South Carolina, it was a time, as Victoria said, a promise of hope, and that was stolen from them, right? Stolen from all of us, right? She saw the writing on the wall before he did. She knew what was coming, and yeah, they definitely could have had a nice life, absolutely, but she also could see what could happen to her children. And as Victoria said earlier, it wasn't the desire for greatness, it wasn't the desire to be white, it was the desire for safety, the desire for whatever quality they could garner. We don't think it was like an overnight decision or a super conscious decision. It was one that evolved over time, with all these realizations building about what the future held for Black people.
And we were editing the book when George Floyd was murdered. And I told Marie at that moment, this is what Genevieve was talking about. She did not want her children to end up on the wrong side of a cop's knee. That's the only thing. She wasn't talking about power. They had money, they had status, they had everything. She was only talking about safety.
Hi, good evening. So enjoying this conversation. If you were teaching a course on how to approach historical fiction, what guides you on the balance between entertainment versus introducing like enough falsehoods that it so deviates from the real history that it throws somebody off?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I was just asking for, you said, how would you kind of draw the line between fact and fiction in writing historical fiction?
In a nutshell.
Yeah, okay, great, I'm sorry, just give me that last part. It's a little different for each book. The way I like to describe it is this, so much of historical fiction, even though of course it is fiction, right? So it's inspired by real people, inspired by real events. And it is very much founded on deep, deep research, right? Everything from the micro details of a character's life to the macro things like cultural movements, military and political developments. We look for everything we can find from an original source material aspect. So that would be letters, journals written by the woman, about the woman, contemporaneous with the time period. All of that stuff, which you do extensively at the beginning and then constantly throughout the writing, that is the architecture of the story. That's the foundation, the pillars, the roof upon which the story hangs. But there are always areas in between those pillars, gray areas, shadowy areas where we don't know exactly what happened. And that's the fiction. So an example from the Personal Librarian we like to use is the one from when Belle DeCosta Green interviewed with J.P. Morgan. Okay, this is a pivotal moment in the book, right? She gets the interview through Junius, JP's nephew, who she's friends with. We know from the historical record that they had an interview. We know approximately on the date. We know the state of the Morgan Library at that time. It was not finally constructed, right? we know something of the characters of our people, right? We know what JP was reportedly like. We know a little bit about Belle. We know her expertise in her manuscripts. We know a little bit about what her personality was like. And we know that she got the job. So, do we know exactly what happened in that interview? No. Can we make a logical extrapolation based on the research, based on the characters, mixed in with some fiction, in like a big cauldron, right? And that's where the fiction comes in. And that kind of gives a sense of how it operates. It's different for every scene. It's different for every chapter. Different for different books, right? Some of it is dependent on the amount of source material you have, how much fiction you have to layer in, and what your goals are, what themes you're trying to share. As another example, we really, it was really important to us, we've talked about this a lot tonight, to show the sacrifices in passing. And we don't know how Belle felt about passing. We don't have any letters that describe it. The only letters really that are still in existence are the ones of Bernard Berenson. She did write to him about that. So how did we fill in the gaps, right? We read extensively about other contemporaneous people's experiences passing, the sorts of things they had to give up, how that felt to them, the tightrope they walked, and then we extrapolated from those experiences into Belle's own.
And one thing I do want to say about the historical fiction part of it, and this is something I learned from Marie, and I don't even think she knows she taught me this, but as I'm writing my own book now, I never make up the flaws. So if somebody's having an affair in the book, they were having an affair. We will never make up something where somebody could be judged and we're changing that. That is what happened. So any of their flaws, it's a record. So we did not make up her having an affair with Bernard. We would not make up even what happened with her with JP. We know that there was Virginia. She's the one that said, so we wouldn't make up that kind of stuff.
So can you talk a little bit about Belle's relationship with her father? We know that he left when they moved to New York shortly after that. And we know that he was a pivotal part of her life, teaching her all about art. So his boy had to really impact her as she continued to grow, and she was reminded of him so many times. And when she finally reconnected with him, it was just for that one visit. And she had to be satisfied with just that one. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so again, here's a little bit about fiction, because we knew all about Belle's travel and what she made trips for and everything. We do know that she went to Chicago in 1913. Was it for one night? We think it was for one night, just a very short trip, and we have no record of what that trip was about. So why? And where did her father live? So, and everything you said, you really answered your own question. Like so much of him was her. She was the only one that followed in his footsteps as a librarian and all of that. So then we have to pull out the fiction. We have to extrapolate what kind of conversation would they have had based on what we know about him and what we know about her. And why would she go see him in 1913, right when J.P. Morgan passed away? Was she now missing this father figure person in her life? So that's where the fiction comes in. But again, like Marie said, we try to make educated guesses. We're not just pulling conversations or anything just out of the air. We're extrapolating it from what we think we know about them. But I think I told Marie from the beginning, she was a daddy's girl. Because you know what? I know a daddy girl when I see one. Because it takes one to know.
Literally, from the first time Victoria said this, which was very early on, I suddenly got that. You know, I'm not a daddy's girl. So when she told me that, all of a sudden, the facts laid out before me very differently, right? I could see.
It takes one to know one.
Yeah, I know. I wish I was. You know, I could see the path that she chose. She was the only one of the children to choose to be a personal librarian and secondarily in the arts. Her father always had an interest in the arts. You know, she deviated from the career her mother wanted for her, which was teaching, right? She was probably most like her father in temperament and charisma, right? So some of the things we filled in terms of fiction, but given that sort of relationship, given that daddy's girl connection, we surmised the impact his leaving would have had on her, and the way in which that would have formed the future course of her life, her siblings' lives, and also the need for her to reconnect with him later.
I can say one thing, my family knows a lot about passing generationally. And one of the things that we've discovered with things like, ancestry, websites and things like that, is that we're reconnecting with a lot of family and discovering sort of our family's accomplishments. And I noticed in the book there was some proportions, especially regarding Belle's father, that sometimes with this passing thing going on, a lot of firsts get overlooked. And I was wondering what your research or thought process was on how African American culture has been deprived of being recognized for their actual firsts for so long, and then having to see somebody else claim, that first accomplishment, first professor, first astronaut, whatever it might be, when we know through our family, our uncle was the first.
That is such a good question. We only have one mic to share over here, so Victoria and I are chatting. That is an excellent question.
Yeah, I never thought about that. So true.
And we have to, well, so we can't say in what context I'm about to say this, right? But we have discussed the fact with respect to some of our other projects that in comparison to some of those people, that Richard T. Greener is somebody who had so many firsts, right? He was the first Black graduate of Harvard, first Black professor and librarian of the University of South Carolina. His accomplishments in the field of oration and equality are massive. He should be well known today, but he had no one to continue his legacy because the rest of his family had passed, and they had to basically distance themselves from it, right? So,
but compare him to someone like Frederick Douglass, who had someone to carry on his legacy. He had his wife, his second wife, who was able to do that. So we did discover kind of that, the difference between Richard T. Greener and Frederick Douglass, because just by marriage or something, it could have changed the whole thing. But that is such a good point, that so many accomplishments have probably been done by Black people who were passing, so we will never know. Great point.
One of the questions that we had in the book, one of the questions that you had in the book was, in the end, do you think Belle was happy with her choices and her decisions? And on page 65, you make the statement, keeping our true identity a secret is a burden that grows heavier with time. So I thought that she was happy that she carried out some of her wishes of her father for making herself a meaningful life, as well as making J.P. Morgan public, library public. But those two thoughts sort of clashed. So I'd like to picture.
Yeah, so we it said that we asked whether or not people thought she was happy, because there were a lot of people, depending on your experiences in life, everybody brings their own experiences to reading a book. And so there are going to be people who think that Belle was happy. And then there are going to be people who will think it's a burden based on their own personal experiences. Again, we don't know whether she was happy or not. We can only extrapolate it. And I think that there were some parts of it that made her very happy. And then there were some parts of it that was a burden. She died pretty young. So I think it was a burden.
You know, important to us in writing this was the sense that Belle would have struggled with the question, what is worth the sacrifice of passing? What could I do with my life that would make it worthwhile, right? This heavy burden that she carries, the inability to have children of her own, to have that sort of legacy, the inability to have a marriage, the inability to stay connected with extended family, all those things she had to jettison to lead the life that she did. And to us, knowing Belle as we do, and looking at the trajectory of her life, what would have made it worthwhile was to leave something behind that outlived her. And the thing that outlived her was turning this world-class, amazing collection into a public institution. She's the one that prompted the Morgans to give this multi-billion-dollar collection over to the public library system. There's really hardly anything like it in the world. And that was totally Belle. I don't think the Morgans would have done that without her. She convinced them to do it. So do we know that for sure? Definitely not. Is there some letter out there? Boy, I'd love to find a letter that says, I think this was the reason why I was meant to pass. You know, we will never, ever know that. But does it make sense with the record as we've seen it, with Belle as we know her, with how important it was to her to turn that institution into a public one? It does. Now, did that make her happy? I don't know. But sometimes happiness is not necessarily equivalent to feeling as though you made the right choice. You made a difference. Yeah, she probably had peaks and valleys of happiness throughout the course of her life, but did she leave a legacy she could be proud of, one that her father would have been proud of? He wouldn't have been proud of her or happy that she had passed. Definitely.
Hi. Thank you, ladies, for writing this book. I actually saw the Good Morning America show, and after that show, I ended up buying 3 of the books. One for myself and for family members. So I spent my time reading the book really in fear, because I kept thinking that Belle would be discovered. And when J.P. Morgan's daughter, the one who didn't like her, indicated that she knew, I thought at that point the gig would be up. And so I wanted to find out, was that fiction? Did J.P. Morgan's daughter actually know that? And if she really did, how come she kept it secret? I know about J.P. Morgan's daughter's lifestyle that she wanted to keep secret, but I thought after a while it would come out from the daughter or the son or someone. So was that part fiction?
So we know from letters contemporaneous with the time period that Belle was really close with the Morgan family. She would go to birthday parties. She was really intimate with the family. Everyone loved her except for Anne, right? That's true. And that is true. We know that's true. We know that Anne was gay, and she herself was in Boston marriages, had friends that were in Boston marriages. She had a huge variety of social justice issues that she pursued. All of these things rankled her father, right? But she had served as his companion, because he and the wife really didn't get along, for a long time, and Belle kind of usurped that role. So we knew that maybe that was why there was tension. But when we explored the idea that Belle could have been outed, we turned to the idea that maybe someone else who was in danger of being outed herself might be the one to have that conversation. Again, we wanted to explore the idea that there are many secrets, many hidden lives, many double identities throughout this time period, and Anne gave us the opportunity. We wanted her to have a conversation with someone in her circle who didn't know for sure, didn't have the proof, but had heard the rumors. And we wanted the reader to know that the rumors were out there.
Yeah, And so, because Belle was never discovered while she was alive. It didn't come out for many decades. And you know how they found out? Nobody's asked the question. How did they find out? So I'm going to ask the question for you. How did they find out that Belle DeCosta Green was Black? Well, there was a historian writing a biographer, not a historian, writing a book about J.P. Morgan. And so everyone knew that Belle was an important part of his J.P. Morgan's life. I don't even know if we were able to show how close they really, really were. And as the biographer was looking around at all the people, I'm sure he looked at the children, everything, looked at Belle. He went back to the census, because even as I'm writing now, that's something that I do. And there was that census early on, a couple of them, where she is listed as a Negro. And he was like, what is this? And then, so, you know, and so that, to me, that really began the whole. So she was long gone. So she was never discovered.
Like you said, we all read the book with our own background in mind. I'm Jewish. There was exactly one Jewish character in this book. And as far as I can tell, against historical evidence, he turned him into a scoundrel. And at the very end, you even accused him of the oldest trope of anti-Semitism, which is, betraying your loved ones for money. I was angry when I finished this book, and I felt it was deeply anti-Semitic.
Oh, and I'm so sorry about that, because that was not our intention at all.
Of course not. I mean, a book about racial equality, why would it have to sneak anti-Semitism into it?
And I didn't even see it that way, because everything that we put in the book, remember I said I would never put in someone's flaws, I would never make that up. That was based on things that we know as fact.
But they stayed friends to the end of their lives, as you said.
Yeah.
And in the author's note that Marie wrote, she confessed that selling the secrets for money was completely made up, which is, you said that you said it's something that you could have imagined him doing. And when you can imagine Jewish people doing bad things, that's what's called.
Yeah, and I understand.
And I'm sorry you felt that way. And we tried very, very careful to be very, very cautious and not play into any stereotypes. I do want you to know that if you've read some of the biographies of Bernard Berenson, if you've dug into some of the original source material, the practices that we depict in the book are practices that he is alleged to have engaged in.
Yes, but not necessarily with her. And
oh no, yes. And
you admit that was something that you made up. And I can see as a plot point, it's nice to have him be a scoundrel. It moves the book forward. It's just too bad it had to.
No, but he really was a scoundrel.
He really was.
No, he was a scoundrel. He was married to another woman, and he was having an affair with all these other people. He really, I mean, those are facts. Those
are facts, and they don't. There were many other people doing that. You have picked out the one Jewish character.
I have to disagree with you, sir. He was the most important romantic interest in her life and pivotal during that time period. We could not have picked someone else. We picked the person who was actually there.
But you gave him certain attributes.
And you're finished. Can we get the mic? Move on.
Yeah. So I just want to say, wait, we're not trying to cut you off. We understand your point, and we are sympathetic to that. It was not that we chose him. He was part of the historical record at the time. The relationship they had, the way she became pregnant and had an abortion at his insistence, the way that he abandoned her emotionally many times, all true. The dealings he had as an art person are all part of the record. We gave her closure in that relationship because we felt like she needed that. She chose to remain friends with him in years afterwards. That but the depiction of him was true to the record and had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he was a Jewish man. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
That's when we found that out about him, we saw that he had to hide that, we felt empathy towards him. We wanted to draw him and Belle together with a shared sense of being persecuted for that different identity that they had to have.
But one thing we do know is that she was the love of his life and he was the love of her life. And they just didn't, there are a whole bunch of star-crossed lovers out there. And it just, but all of that was true. And that's what I said, we'll never make up the flaws. I will never make up somebody to be worse than they are. I'll make them better than they are, but I won't. And that was all really true.
Okay, here. Personal Library, in my opinion, best book ever. Okay. Marie, Victoria, you know that this is Carlin here. Okay. You know that I love Val, but I'm totally enthralled with Mr. Greener. He's from South Carolina. I cannot possibly stand from Reconstruction. Working for the University of South Carolina. When I grew up in the 60s, I couldn't even see that then. So was he, I didn't pick up in the book what he was passing, did he?
No, he was the first, but the Civil Rights Act of 1875 had been passed. And so what you can't imagine was what life was like after the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Because if we had kept that, this country would be totally different. And so that was a time where everybody was equal. The reason you can't see it in the 60s was because that Civil Rights Act had been overturned by the Supreme Court, so we better watch out. And so they were living during that time where everybody was equal. And I know it's hard for you to see, I know it, but that was the law. And that's why people went to court to overturn it. They didn't want that. So that's when during Reconstruction, which was a wonderful period, maybe we should write some more books during that period of time. Because during Reconstruction, that's when you had all the black legislatures voted in. There were more black legislatures in Mississippi than anywhere else. And that's when he went down there. He was the first, they brought him down there because now they were going to be equal. They wanted the first black professor there. He was a librarian. They wanted him to put back the library. So I understand you not being able to imagine it because we hardly have it now. But it was right after that period where this country was trying to be equal for everyone. That was, I know. But think about that, they had more black legislators out of Mississippi than anywhere. And you can't get that now.
Hi, I'm Deepa. I wanted to thank you both for an amazing book. My question has to do with the pressure that Belle felt to not get married and not have children. And my understanding was because she didn't want to have a baby that may not be able to pass. So why didn't her siblings feel that same pressure? And did they have children?
They felt the same pressure.
They felt the same pressure. So she had one brother and 3 sisters. 2 of her sisters didn't have children. As far as we know, her brother didn't have children. Her youngest sister, Teddy, was the fairest of them all. She was blonde and blue-eyed. And she had never been black. She didn't remember. She probably had no memory of being a black person. She had moved to New York when she was much younger. She married a white man, and she did have a child with him. That child ended up being raised by Belle and her mother when Teddy's first husband died in World War I. She remarried and again married another white man and had 2 girls, we think. So she did take that risk, and I'm not sure, I can't speak to this exactly, but perhaps because she wasn't rooted in the black culture, perhaps because she was the fairest, she decided to take that risk. But the other sisters and brothers did not.
They felt the same pressure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank everyone for coming out and sharing this evening with us. We definitely enjoyed the conversation and our wonderful guests. We would like for you to please go to our website to look at some more upcoming programs that we have at all of our 34 libraries. And now at this time, we will end the event with the book signing. And you can form a line coming around that way by the ramp. We have, they will be signing the Personal Librarian as well as their New York Ladies First.
Oh my God, I'm just gonna try to read it. How are you? Oh my God. Wonderful, but I'm just like, I'm like, we're not even here. I'm here. Oh, yeah. Very good time. So we'll reach out, I'll get yeah. Here. One book. Okay. Send me their logo. You guys send me your logo. Yeah, and I mentioned it to Karen as well. I'll talk to you about it. Which is here. We're thinking of talking about it. Okay. We're excited. Sounds good. Yeah. We're gonna have to be better than that. All right. Okay. All right. You take care. I'll talk to you soon. Hey.